Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. If you can hear this, please let me know in the comments that I am being heard. Just want to check the audio. We are currently waiting for Murad. He will be here in about 3 minutes. But if you can let me know that you can hear this, that would be great, because I haven't done one of these in a little while. So I'm hoping there's no technical difficulties, but everyone please bear with me if there are any. Murad will be with us in a little bit. Until he gets here, I'll kind of give you guys a history of Stake Podcast. Stake Podcast started back in like 2020, I think, and it started as a project where I was interviewing people about the Decred project, and then I became a contractor for the Decred project, and started hosting Decred in depth. Then life got in the way, and I had to, finish up my education. Things just got kind of busy, and wasn't able to continue on with the podcast for a little while. But now I'd like to start doing this again. And Murad has been kind enough to come on as my first reintroducing guest. Sorry, I just got a call. Murad is someone who's very special to me. We went to school back in 2012, and he's the first person who ever told me about Bitcoin. And sorry, stand by. He's the first person who ever told me about Bitcoin. And I remember when he first told me about it, I thought he was absolutely crazy. Just kind of didn't think about it for many years after that until around 2016, 2017. And by that time, there was sort of a big wave, a big crypto bubble happening. And I remembered what Murad had said to me back in 2013 or something like that. And so I reached out to him, started asking him questions, and over the course of the last 4 years, have been fortunate enough to be able to just stay in contact with him and ask him questions, really. He's kind of been my intellectual father in this space, if you will. I have relied on him for just conversation and friendship, because not many of my in real life friends are into like crypto, and so he was someone I was always able to just like reach out to and talk to, and he's been kind enough to come and talk to us today, and I think that is him right now, so stand by. Hello, Murad.
How's it going, bro? How's it going?
It's going well. Can you hear me all right?
Yep, I can.
Okay. I'm not going to waste any of your time. I just want to start by saying, thank you for being willing to come and talk with me. I already kind of gave an introduction before you popped up, so I'm sure most people who are watching this are going to be watching this for you, so they probably already know a lot about you. And I was explaining that I've had the privilege of getting to know you, and I want this interview to be a little different because you've been doing kind of the podcast circuit. A lot of people have been asking you the same questions, and so I want to be able to ask you questions that I haven't heard other people ask you, and maybe some that I have heard people ask you, but still want to dive deeper. And so I'll start with, how are you doing?
Doing well, doing well. Kind of, taking it day by day. I think this whole thing is going to be a marathon, not a sprint. So I'm kind of encouraging both myself and also the people around me to be stoic, be humble, and to kind of be long termist, right? And to kind of be patient because I think it sounds crazy to many, but I genuinely think we have 7 to 14 months of like the meme coin mania and the overall bull market still to go. So we need to kind of like pace ourselves. Yeah.
I've had the pleasure of watching you from afar. I was explaining to the audience before you got on. Um, I've watched you grow intellectually in terms of physical and mental health. And so I was wondering if you could talk to us about some of your philosophies on health, both mental and physical, and why it's essential for your entrepreneurial and investment endeavors.
Yeah, for sure. So, to be transparent, like I don't always live up to my own sort of like perfect theories and ideas about health, but I will describe what I believe is like the right way to do it. So I think a lot of people underestimate the importance of sleep. Um, I think a lot of people in the modern world just like being busy bees and like in the hustle and the bustle. We don't get enough sleep. We don't get enough quality sleep, not enough deep sleep. So that's the foundation of everything. Second thing is sounds very simple, but I think a lot of people don't drink enough water. On the diet front, I'm a big believer in like carnivore slash keto. I think the Western diet has too many carbohydrates in it and not enough meat, especially fatty meat, because I think fatty meat is like what the body naturally wants the most. I'm also a big believer in fasting, and like for most days, I only eat once a day, um, and just fast for the remaining 23 hours. I think that is very healthy because that is much closer to the way our ancestors ate for most of like the evolution of human beings. In fact, most of them ate only once every 2 or 3 days. So at least once a day is much closer to that than eating 3 times a day, right? But I want to caveat all of this with by saying that I'm not really a nutrition expert or like a health expert, but I'm just sharing what has worked for me, right?
Absolutely. And I'll caveat this by saying uh, a lot of people ask you about your, you know, thesis. And I haven't heard many people ask you about who you are, how you think. And so that's kind of some of the impetus behind some of these questions. Um, Along those lines, and maybe this is, maybe there's not an easy answer, or there's nothing straightforward to this, but what are some of your daily habits, or even in the ideal, what would be some of the daily habits that investors and entrepreneurs and just people who are trying to be their best selves should, in your opinion, the ideal?
So I read a lot. I consume a lot of information, and I think it's important to consume a lot of information, ideally from quality sources, because you need to see like life slash reality slash your respective industry from a variety of perspectives in order to kind of synthesize ongoing trends and to kind of make sense of the world as accurately as you can. So that's a very important part. And so I know social media is presented as a toxic thing, and understandably so. But I actually spend a lot of time on Twitter. I actually increasingly think that books are kind of overrated, especially in the context of the modern world, because while there are some timeless classics, when it comes to the books written recently, I would say by the time the book is written, edited, and published, a lot of them kind of become irrelevant just because the world is changing so quickly. And not only is the world changing quickly, the rate at which the world is changing is also increasing, right? So not just velocity, but acceleration as well. And in the context of our industry that we find ourselves in, which is crypto, Twitter is like the town square for all of the latest events and the latest kind of theories and the latest news. So I spend a lot of time on Twitter. My overall thesis is also that finance and social media are becoming increasingly interconnected. And in the context of memes, which are more so attention based and community based, it's even more important than with other assets. So I try to spend a lot of time on Twitter, try to spend a bunch of time on YouTube as well, but you have to be very, very selective with what you consume because like 99% of stuff there is essentially like infotainment. It's essentially like the junk food equivalent of videos. So yeah, in terms of my day to day, I also like to walk and to meditate um, because I find that I get a lot of good and new and interesting ideas in those kind of mental states as well.
So the two follow-on questions to what you just said. The first is you talked about reading and you know YouTube. In terms of some of the sources that you use, what are some of the media outlets that you like? Like are you reading the Wall Street Journal? Are you reading the New Yorker? What sort of things do you like to read? And same in the YouTube space. Maybe if you want to throw out some of your favorite YouTubers, give them a shout out here. And then uh, what are some tips you have for people who have never tried meditating and they want to get into it? They're interested in starting to do something like that, and some of the benefits. Or what do you think about that?
Yeah. So I'll start off with your latter question. So there is a really good book called The Right Concentration, and it's quite detailed, but I think it's a really, really good book to get people um, acclimated and informed about kind of like the nitty-gritty of meditation. So I think that's a great place to start. Um, in terms of what kind of information I consume, I don't consume any like you said, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, um, all of the old guard of the media. I don't really consume it. I think what you want is to figure out people that have interesting and unique and contrarian takes on Twitter, and I think that's going to be your best source of information. I think, at the risk of sounding crude, I think Instagram and TikTok, effectively, they are platforms where you flex with your body, and Twitter is a platform where you flex with your brain. So I think the average or aggregate IQ on Twitter is that's where you're going to find more kind of interesting and well thought out takes. So I would say, at least in the context of our industry, and frankly, finance overall, Twitter is probably the best place to be. There are some good blogs, kind of like on the periphery of this space. Some good substacks as well. But a lot of the times, it will once again be Twitter where you initially find that information in the first place. So um, it's a bit like it can be a bit overwhelming and can be a bit too much sometimes. But the frank reality is that I think if you want to like make it in crypto or to grow very quickly, whether it's financially or personally, you probably want to be spending a lot of time on Twitter, and just kind of like keep a tab on the pulse, so to speak.
Speaking of Twitter, your Twitter location is late stage capitalism. Describe these ideas and how they tie into your thoughts about the current state of investment and how they've been shaping your thinking.
Yeah, so quite a quite a dense question, but essentially, I think my whole thesis is that at some point within 20 to 30 years, Bitcoin, aka BTC, is going to become like the global monetary reserve. However, then you kind of ask yourself, what is going to be the path between the present and that future end state equilibrium, right? And I think that um, it's going to be very chaotic. Um, very crudely speaking, I think we're going to see Weimar before we see La Belle Epoch, right? If you're familiar. So we're probably going to see more inflationary pressures in the coming decades before we reach some kind of like a neo gold standard type situation. So probably more inflation before a mildly deflationary system is what I think is going to happen. And as a byproduct of that, I kind of semi-jokingly say that we will see um, hyper meme coinization before hyper Bitcoinization, right? And essentially, I think we're gonna reach a point in the future where BTC represents the vast majority of like the crypto asset market cap. But before we go there, I think there's going to be a lot of chaos, a lot of gambling, hyper gambling, and a lot of sort of speculative like bubbles and a lot of sort of these like parabolas. And while many people expect that to happen in the altcoin space, I think it's much more likely to happen in the meme coin space because that's like the current meta and that's what's currently has like the strongest momentum and that's what's currently capturing like the zeitgeist and the market caps in aggregate are not very high compared to altcoins, right? Um, that's kind of like internal to crypto. Externally, obviously, the debt burdens of all of the countries will rise over the next 15 years. Um, obviously, the global money supply will also increase. Interest rate expenditure will increase. And I think all of these trends that I've described, they're fundamentally bullish crypto in the long term. And I think they're also bullish on meme coins in the short to medium term. And that's why I'm so focused on them right now.
Showing my ignorance here, but I've heard you use that Weimar and La Belle Epoch analogy before. And could you just give a very brief sort of what you're thinking there? Because I've heard of the Weimar Republic. I'm definitely not familiar with La Belle Epoch. Could you maybe, I'm sure there's others who feel the same.
Yeah, Weimar Republic is essentially the period in the history of Germany between World War One and World War Two, and specifically in the several years after World War One, Germany has had kind of a hyperinflationary event, and this obviously had a lot of negative effects on German society. Um, it took almost a decade to kind of like fix the currency properly by mid to late 1920s, right? Um, La Belle Epoque, on the other hand, is quite the polar opposite. That's the period roughly coinciding with the 1880s in Europe. And a lot of people believe that that was the peak of the gold standard in the Western system. And a lot of people believe that that also coincided with sort of the peak of culture and kind of spiritual moral purity of the Western world. And some Bitcoiners believe that it's not a coincidence that kind of like the arts and the culture and the sciences, they all blossomed at the same time as gold was like at its peak, right? So that's essentially what I mean by Weimar before La Belle Epoque. Essentially, we're going to see chaos before we see kind of future stability.
Is investing more like chess or poker? And which of these games do you prefer?
So I think it depends on the cyclical nature of the overall economy, as well as the cyclical nature of the specific financial market that you find yourself in. I think it was more like, at least in the context of crypto, it was more like poker for the past 2.5 years. But right now, it's becoming closer to chess. Which one of the two I like more? These you actually listed my top two favorite games, but I think I like poker more because of that element of human psychology and probability, which is quite quite sort of fascinating and exciting, especially when you're playing live.
Why do you say the current landscape is becoming more like chess?
Because I think that it's becoming more important to strategize overall. Like strategy is becoming more important than tactics, right? Or it's becoming a little bit. Um, you have to plan. If you believe that 2025 is going to be bullish, you have to carefully plan how you're going to position yourself for that. Whether you're going to trade or you're going to just invest or you're going to just believe, right? And also, it's becoming less PvP, right? Because I would argue that for a lot of periods in the last 2, 3 years in crypto, um, it was like a relatively small pool of capital fighting each other for like small gains on chain or on centralized exchanges. But obviously, if we're going to get one of those parabolas or retail slash institutional inflows that usually happens in crypto once every 4 years next year, then that pool of capital is going to expand. So, you know, during the fourth year of a bull cycle, active trading is often not the best strategy, and just buying and holding is often the better strategy. But what becomes more important is asset selection. And that's kind of exactly why I've been focused on trying to identify which of these memes are going to be the strongest in the coming meme coin cycle.
We're going to get to memes very soon, but before we do, my last personal related question is what is your favorite anime?
Um, I watched Black Clover recently. I really like that. I like Bleach from way back when, and I also like Freyren from one of the recent ones. I think that was a masterpiece.
One of your quotes is meme coins are a guild in the MMROPG that is crypto. You have chosen 10 guilds in your viral meme coin list. What do these guilds say about you?
Um, the last thing I heard was you've chosen 10 guilds in your list. What did you follow that up with?
Why did you choose these guilds or what do they say about you?
Yeah, great question. So first things first, I actually don't like the term meme coins. I think the more accurate term is tokenized communities. In other words, you're not so much investing in memes, you're actually investing in people. And the reason I built my portfolio, I essentially wanted to be diversified from a variety of angles. But at its crux, my thesis is that I want to be long category leaders. So essentially, I identify 10 categories and I try to find like top one, top two candidates for each category. The other angle I like to look at it from, and I think that's going to be closer to answering your guilt's question. Um, Human beings, they have different archetypes, and different groups of people have different neural chemistry, which means that people have different tastes, different aesthetic preferences. different value systems, different ethics, etc. And if you hang out in the group chats of the 10 communities that I've chosen, you will personally feel that the vibe is quite different in each. And essentially, I'm betting that you want to build a portfolio which accounts for different human archetypes, which accounts for different brain chemistries, right? So, for example, very crudely speaking, with Giga, you're gonna have like more sort of like straightforward, athletic, kind of like masculine, moderately right wing type guys, right? And for example, with Harry Potter, Bomba Songton Inu, you're gonna have people that are a bit more chill, a bit more esoteric, a bit more eccentric, a bit more sort of hipster and artsy, right? Um, and like I said, like different parts of these um, different coins, they represent sort of these different archetypes. So I wanted to be diversified with my exposures to each kind of like groups of people, right? And we can be confident that meme coin, like we can have a high degree of confidence that some form of a meme coin cycle is going to happen. But I think it's wise to like hold more than one coin. And essentially, I think like somewhere between like probably like 5 to 10 is the sweet spot.
Recently, Elon Musk has been posting himself playing, I think, Diablo. Did you play any MMROPG games growing up or even now? And what, if anything, can be learned from these experiences?
Yeah, I've played quite a bit of World of Warcraft and also Lineage 2, which is something that's quite similar. And I was a pretty avid player, kind of between the ages of like 12 to 16. Um, you know, First things first, you can view crypto as a giant MMORPG. You can view crypto Twitter as its own kind of text-based metaverse, right? And you already have the guilds. Like a lot of the guilds up until recently, they were simply group chats, like group chats of traders and investors. Right now, a lot of the guilds are also the specific meme coins, right? If you actually think about it, what meme coins are, they are effectively giant group chats or groups of group chats united under a similar meme, under a similar banner, with a turbocharged by additional financial incentives in the way of the token, right? And so essentially, um, we are in the midst of an attention war. And I think memes are essentially weapons. And you can view the raiders on Twitter as kind of like the warrior class. And you can view like the meme makers as more like a healer or a blacksmith, right? And so on and so forth. And I think that's pretty much what's going on here.
I've often heard you skip a question. As I see it, your investment approach has been one of looking into the future and making predictions about human behavior and trends, coupled with a good understanding of human psychology and sociology. Then you back it up with data. Can you talk to me about how you view your own investment philosophy?
Yeah. So, one of the 35 reasons why I'm bullish memes is because if you actually try to display some empathy and try to put yourself in the shoes of somebody who is like in their 20s and 30s, you have to ask yourself like, what can they even invest in, right? What can they even buy? Because real estate is quite expensive. The stock market is arguably expensive. The currency is getting diluted. Um, and even BTC, which I still think has 100x, 200x to go in the coming decades, in the context of the next year, year and a half, it probably has a 2x or a 3x in the tank, right? And I think that retail, they kind of know this, right? Or they kind of can sense this. And they are going to be pushed further down the risk curve. Essentially, the system incentivizes you to take a chance on riskier assets, right? And this is why the main altcoin meta of each cycle is becoming more and more crazy, is becoming kind of more and more wild, more and more schizo. And it makes perfect sense because the more money there is in the global system, the more anxiety that people experience. And this anxiety pushes people to kind of be a little bit more aggressive with their money. And my thesis is that meme coins, and specifically the top meme coin cults, they're going to be the beneficiaries of not only a bunch of these investment flows, but also on the more spiritual plane, they're going to be the vessels that attract a lot of this dissatisfaction with the world and with people's lives. And they're going to provide people with community, provide people with meaning, provide people with adventure, obviously turbocharged by self-interest with the token, right? So that's kind of how I would describe it.
I've also heard you talk about not just sympathizing with retail, but also putting yourself into the shoes of TradFi investors. And I've heard you do similar thoughts experiments with VCs, hedge fund managers, etc. Why are these microeconomic thought experiments important for investors?
Yeah, because it's kind of similar to your poker table analogy. You need to, you know, the crypto market has various stakeholders. There are the kind of the VCs, there are the funds. We are seeing increasing TradFi participation. There's obviously the ETF flows. Then there is kind of like crypto native whales. There's retail. There's smart retail. There are the engineers. And whenever you're investing, both you need to have kind of a thesis about the industry overall, but you also need to have a thesis about your specific category. And you need to put yourself in the shoes of these different stakeholders to try to predict how will they react, how will they behave, and putting it all together, what does this imply for prices of certain things, right?
I've heard you talk about four categories of crypto assets. What are your current thoughts on store value coins, particularly Monero, Decred, Grin?
Um, BTC over everything. BTC over everything. Because it's not so much about utility. It's mostly about liquidity, and it's about faith, and it's about belief, and it's about kind of like social consensus and like lendiness, right? And BTC just kind of like blows everything else out of the water to such a large extent. Um, the closest alternatives to BTC are ETH and Solana. But I think while Solana is good tech and, and up in price because of the hyper gambling demand for the meme coins, for like the day-to-day flavor of the week meme coin gambling, um, I don't think it's as good of a store of value as BTC is. But that being said, I mean, realistically, it will probably be BTC and to a lesser extent Ethereum and Solana for the coming one or two cycles.
I'm going to skip that question and go to what are your thoughts on long term emission schedules such as Solana versus cap supply, like Bitcoin?
So in a perfect world, the capped supply would be much more desirable because then essentially you have the money supply that is completely inelastic. And instead of the money supply changing to adapt to the world as the current system is working, you instead have the money supply kept fixed, and then you have the world change itself instead, right? And I think that's much better. I think that keeps the system in check. Obviously, for that to happen, we would want to see more economic activity on BTC and in the BTC ecosystem at large. But in the last 2 years, we're seeing kind of like ordinals, we're seeing runes, we're seeing a bunch of different use cases emerge on BTC. So hopefully, as the years go by, people will figure out more and more use cases for kind of like the BTC network to kind of offset the decreasing mining rewards with just fees and fee generation.
I'll follow up that with what about things like stacks, STX? Is that a possible viable long term solution for the ending cap of BTC in terms of emission?
Um, how do you envision it being a solution in the future?
My understanding is the way that the consensus system works with Bitcoin is like the miners have to bid in order to get a chance at the next block in stacks, and then if they win that bid, they get STX, and then the reward of the Bitcoin goes to STX stakers. And so, in a world in which the mining of BTC ends, then there's still this sort of or like market that has been created amongst miners who've decided to participate in XTX of bidding for STX blocks and receiving STX in exchange for BTC.
Right, right. Yeah, I'm not an expert on the stacks mechanism. Um, so I don't think I'm the best person to kind of give judgment in that regard. Sometimes I see people talk about things where I kind of personally know the answer better and it doesn't look right. So I think it's best if I refrain from talking about this because stacks, frankly speaking, has not been kind of my focus for the past several years.
Respect. And now that we've moved, I'd like to kind of change chapters here and really focus on meme coins. So, at what point did you know this was going to be a meme coin focused cycle, and how did you come to this determination?
So it wasn't any one eureka, but it's a bunch of kind of mini eureka moments um, added together, right? Like roughly speaking, Doge is your signal one. Doge in 2021 again is your signal two. SHIB is your signal three. That whole Doge mania was your signal four. Then Pepe in 2023 was your signal five. And then WIF in March 2024 was your signal six. And I think this gives you sufficient signals to start looking at meme coins more seriously. And that's kind of what happened to me as well.
I want to discuss the months leading up to your presentation at Token 2024. You already had built a name for yourself in the space. In the months leading up to the event, you start posting about meme coins on Twitter. Then you put out your completed list. Then you go to the belly of the beast and publicly defend your thesis. This took tremendous balls at a time when what you were saying was not even a minority consensus. Tell me about the months leading up to Token 2024. How did you develop this conviction, and what was it like going against the narrative of VCs in the space?
Yeah, I mean, after WIF and the resulting meme mania in March 2024, April 2024. My view is that after that happened, you kind of have to start looking at memes a bit more seriously. So I built a big Popcat position. I started building positions in Giga, and I could just see not only on multi-month high time frames, but also even on low time frames, like whenever BTC would dump and immediately bounce back, the meme coins would bounce back faster and harder, which is kind of like a signal, like day-to-day signal, uh, frequent signal that meme coins is what people are buying this cycle, right? And again, not just on a multi-month kind of basis, but even intraday. And once you have built a sizable Popcat position, Giga position, you start kind of observing their relative performance, and you notice that Popcat is outperforming Solana, Popcat is outperforming BTC, and when it's happening once or twice, it's like whatever. But when you see it happen over and over and over again, uh, even while BTC and Solana are bleeding, you start to kind of think there must be something there, and you start trying to understand why is happening, what's attracting people to memes, why are these trends persisting, and you kind of start kind of researching deeper, and that's kind of what happened to me as well.
In one Twitter space, you said, "We need people to think I'm crazy." That's exactly what you want. Why is this?
Because bull markets are often built on a wall of worry. And if everybody thinks that I'm crazy, then that means that we're still early. And it's like we can still go higher until literally everybody on the street is talking about meme coins, which is still not the case. We can continue climbing higher. Simple as that.
I'm going to ask two follow on questions that are along this same line of reasoning that I didn't have in my original questions, but they are sort of developing things, and I think I'd be remiss to not ask you. The first is the recent doxing, which I've heard you address in previous interviews of your wallets. When I saw that, my thought was, this is probably the future of investing, in which, like, if things are moving on the blockchain, real world assets are moving on the blockchain, equities are moving onto the blockchain, like, there's going to be no place for investors to hide. Everyone will know your moves, um, which is obviously a lot different from the traditional investment space, but that's exactly what we want. So, do you have any thoughts on that? And then the follow-on question, which I'm hesitant to ask because I know you're a very respectful person, but I feel like I'd be missing an opportunity to not ask you about Crypto Man Ran, who recently put out some very long tweet in which he critiqued your thesis. And I think those two thoughts are kind of tied together. So, what are your thoughts on this?
Yes, so I do agree that the future of investing is going to become more open source, and I think people are going to be more transparent. And I think that's kind of cool because you'll be able to sort of see whether a person's behavior behind the scenes matches the game. And at least in my personal life, I do my best to make sure that they match. So I try to practice what I preach. In terms of Crypto Man Ran, you know, we need people to doubt our thesis. We need people to think every single week that we've topped, it's all over. This is overvalued. This is a bubble. There is no fundamentals. The reality is that meme coins actually have more utility than altcoins because altcoins have been meme coins all along, and meme coins do that thing better because the community is better, the price discovery is better, the distribution is better. And you can ride the journey like earlier on, cheaper, in a more kind of fair and transparent manner. And the memes are better. You know, the virality chances are much better. And that's just off the top of my head. There's like 30 other things. So people don't understand the value of the intangible, the value of the psychological, the spiritual, the value of culture. And this is essentially, I don't want to say a new paradigm because it's already been with us since 2013, but it's something that's becoming more commonplace, and people are realizing the power of tokenized communities. And I think we're still just early in this wave. So, like I said, we need the doubters in order to grow, because they just fuel our resolve.
One quote you are known for saying is altcoins are not about technology and meme coins are not about memes. My follow on question to that comment is outside of money, what use cases for blockchain technology do you think are valuable?
So, in order, one is a store of value, that's BTC. Two is payments and payment rails, which is essentially USDC and USDT on kind of like high throughput blockchains. Third is what I believe are soon going to be cash flow coins. Essentially, it's like DeFi that actually does produce real revenue. And the fourth, it's tokenized communities, aka meme coins, aka cults, aka neo religions, whatever you want to call them. It's essentially tokenizing the intangible, right? Tokenizing different, like the tokenizing various non-physical things. So I think at them, obviously, a very major one is, of course, speculation and trading. So I think like these are the top five right now. There'll probably be some others, but I think for the foreseeable future, these are the top five use cases.
Crypto is an asset first industry. How do you view real world assets? Obviously, equities will move on to the blockchains, but what does it mean for crypto to be an asset first industry?
Essentially, when I say that, I mean um, people build software in order to sell a token rather than the other way around.
Not having revenue is an advantage. This goes against traditional value investing philosophies of Buffett and Benjamin Graham. What are your
Yes.
thoughts on being contrarian and what has changed?
Yeah. So, because they're printing so much money, the people's behaviors change. Um, and my view is that attention is becoming more important for financial markets than cash flows. Um, I think that when we will be in a deflationary paradigm, cash flows will be more important than attention. But as we're in an increasingly inflationary paradigm, attention is more important than cash flows. And essentially, the more they print, the more important attention becomes relative to cash flows. And that's essentially why meme coins are rising right now, because there's too much money in the system and it needs to go somewhere and it has nowhere to go.
How do you? So this is something that I got from Rao Paul, but he has talked about meme coins and tokens in general, and this idea of you have within businesses like the equity layer, then you have like the what the credit layer, just these different layers of businesses, and now he's coming with this thesis or argument that we've created a new layer of value capture for businesses called the tokenization layer. And I see this playing out with Giga, Whereas, like, okay, there's Giga, the meme coin, and then there's Giga, the brand that has, protein powder and T-shirts and things like this. What are your thoughts on this idea of a tokenization layer, and is that the direction meme coins are headed?
Um, so in the context of traditional businesses and any kind of projects that generate a revenue, I don't think you have a tokenization layer per se. I think in the long run, this token will probably represent some kind of an equity or some kind of a quasi on-chain equity, right? In the context of memes, yes, I think they are much more relevant, much more interesting, because instead of relying on revenues and fees, you're essentially tokenizing the idea itself, and then the token becomes a financialized layer of faith or financialized vessel of dissatisfaction, whatever you want to call it. And essentially, it acts to attract capital in order to kind of make itself heard, make the idea go viral, right? And effectively, you're voting with your money. Whenever you're buying, you want that message to go wider across the world, and whenever you're selling, you're kind of muting the noise, right? So, um, in some ways, I would agree. In some ways, I would disagree.
Cults versus movements. What is the difference, and how can cult coins make themselves movements?
Yeah. So when I say cult, I just mean really, really, really strong community. And movements is essentially what I theorize to be kind of the next step. And I would say SPX and Giga, SPX 6900 and Giga Chad, they are probably closest right now to be movements. These are like loose words. And essentially, if like a cult is a really strong community, then a movement is a really strong cult. But with a movement, you need to have some kind of a message, some kind of a mission. You need to have a belief in the community that you're making the world a better place in some way. And you want that message to be heard around the world, like I said, right? So it ultimately boils down to inspiration, because if you trigger a lot of inspiration in people's hearts, then they're going to provide kind of free services for the community. And if a lot of people end up doing that, the community is going to go very, very far.
You have better odds with meme coins than sports betting or casinos. Are meme coin investors closeted gamblers?
So very good question. I do think 99% of meme coins is gambling, but that 1% that I'm looking for is, instead of gambling, focus on community building. And I think that's much more interesting, because instead of having to rotate and trade every week, you can buy and hold for months, even quarters. And I find that much more interesting, because I think obviously sustainable communities are going to go much higher than anything that's like gambling or active trading.
You focus your meme coin investing on Solana and Ethereum. When I wrote this question, no one had asked you this question, but I heard you answer it yesterday on a space, but I'm still going to ask it. Um, why not things such as runes on Bitcoin?
Um, yeah, so I do think that the Bitcoin assets are going to do well. You know, I agree that there's a lot of idle wealth on BTC, but the average ETH and SOL holder historically is more inclined to dabble in altcoin investing. And so that's kind of like that offsets it a little bit. The other issue is, you know, BTC infrastructure is a bit clunky still. And I think that if even if we have 1 year of it to go, like when will that be fixed? Probably not in the next 4 to 6 months. So kind of like time is running out a little bit for this cycle to play out. And I just think that Ethereum and Solana is something that's much easier for payment providers, infrastructure providers, data providers, centralized exchange providers to like plug into. And that's why probably the biggest meme activity is going to be on those two chains, in my opinion.
Meme coins are an attack on crypto tech tokens, not crypto tech. Another way of saying this is that most
Yeah.
projects don't need a token. What are some future crypto tech projects you can still imagine?
Like I said, I think most of them will become equity on chain, and the ones that don't will turn into meme coins.
Okay.
So here's the thing. I think a lot of a lot of a lot of so first things first, right? I believe that almost all of the altcoins that have ever existed have been meme coins all along. So with that in mind, a lot of people think that the current meme coin wave, um, it's kind of like degeneracy or whatever. But I actually think it represents maturity. Essentially, what meme coins are doing is they're splitting the speculation and the community on one side and the tech on the other side. And essentially, meme coins are going to act as a check against VCs so that they can't scam anymore. And essentially, because the speculative stuff is going to go into meme coin land, so in the future, VCs and tech founders, they'll actually need to build something useful in order to succeed.
Meme coins are tokenizing the intangibles. What are your thoughts about the monetization of intangible assets? How does crypto allow these things to be captured in value? And why are these things potentially worth trillions of dollars?
Yeah, so when I say intangible, I mean things like art, ideas, communities, faith, belief, emotion, culture, fashion, etc. Like it's these things that are like not necessarily physical, and these meme tokens, right? I think they are a mixture of a token representing the community, but also a token representing like the ideals, the spirit, the value system, the belief system of that community. And it 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 appears that we're living at a time where people want to financialize essentially their groups of friends, their organizations, their group chats, etc. And this is just one of the several things that are getting tokenized, right? And I had a tweet kind of like describing all of these things. The way I see it is the rise of meme coins. Half of it is because central banks are printing a lot, and the other half is because people are like super lack me. And when these two things meet together, you kind of get these tokenized meme coins that are arising right now.
I have 3 questions left for you. You recently put out an NFT list. Can you tell me about how you came to your ranking? What categories have you created for different NFTs? Do you think that there are investment opportunities in NFTs such as music and in-game items? And a corollary to that I want to add now is I include ordinals in NFTs.
Yeah, so I think in-game items and music, it's likely going to merge with NFT technology in some way, but I'm not sure whether there's going to be many obvious 100x opportunities there. It's more so just kind of like a nice to have behind the scenes. In terms of my NFT list, my thesis is very simple. This cycle, the NFTs that will do well are those that represent the meme coin collection. So things like Sproto Gremlins with Harry Potter, Bombasonic, and Inu, Project Eon with SPX 6900, Apu NFT with Apu, and Retardio Cousins with Retardio. And I like Bitcoin Puppets as well. So I think these will do well because when you have both the NFT and the meme coin success is going to make the NFT holders wealthier. But at the same time, the NFTs are going to be used as a social media signaling tool for people to constantly see that meme coin community like out there on the internet.
You said that you don't see many 100x opportunities in music and in-game items, and I agree with that. Um, One thought that I have is it seems like meme coins and these type of NFTs, what they have in common is like a bet on culture. And so if you're able to identify maybe an early NFT music artist, which I'm not saying I can do that, but there's someone who feels like they could, or they have a good pulse on music, or maybe someone who, eventually a lot of these crypto games are not at the level they need to be, but at some point maybe one of them has a big moment. And if you're the gaming type who's able to identify that, is your kind of reasoning here that it's like it's not that these opportunities won't exist, it's just that they're few and far between, and that's not where you'd rather focus, especially for the next 8 to 14 months.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly like you described it. I think there are better opportunities out there right now with stronger momentum. So that's exactly why my focus is elsewhere at the moment.
What lessons can you share with the audience about emotional control and investing? And how do you remain calm when your emotions are bringing you to a high or a low? And how do you identify these feelings?
Um, don't look at the charts too much. Do a lot of research before buying anything on chain and off chain. Um, don't use a lot of leverage and prefer spot over perps and try to think in quarters or even years rather than weeks. And if you combine all of these things, I think you're going to have a much better time.
Murad Mahmudov, I want to personally thank you for your time. It means a lot to me, and I'll say it to you personally. You've kind of been my intellectual father over the last 4 years, and the conversation I've got to have with you have been a tremendous blessing to me and my family, and so thank you. Before you head out, I want you to give the audience 3 recommended reads on investing, personal development, fiction. Um, I know you're not big into books right now, so really run the gamut. Manga, whatever it is.
Yeah, really good question. Um, you know, I'm gonna reiterate what I said earlier, which is these books you're gonna read, like they're not really gonna train you for what's going on right now. You need to rely on your own brain and instinct and pattern recognition. So I would reiterate what I said earlier, which is spend as much time as you can on Twitter because all of the new and crazy stuff that's happening, uh, it books aren't really going to describe it. It's because a lot of these things are brand new, so you need to be on the forefront of it. So my advice is to spend a lot of time on Twitter.
Murad Mahmudov, thank you very much for your time. Um, yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Take care.